economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. If you listen to Point of View on a regular basis, you know that here at this radio broadcast, we're coming up to the end of the year here. And this year marks the 45th year that this program has been on the air and broadcasting. And we've been celebrating this all year, and I've really enjoyed celebrating it. We're going to do a bit of that this week, and I'm pretty excited to do it. I like thinking back about what we talked about over the years and some of the issues that we've covered and the wonderful guests that we've had. And, as new issues surface, something that, as I've started to listen back to some of our old broadcasts and sound bites and things, I'm realizing that the issues don't really change all that much. There's a new face, new wrinkles on some of these things, new challenges that we face, and sometimes there are new issues, and, you and I can probably think of a few of those. But a lot of times it's the same thing. And, we've been debating taxes and tax cuts. That's one of the issues that perennially faces the country ever since the beginning of our nation. And so we are going to talk about that and other financial issues with our first guest. And I'm very excited. I actually have not met this guest before, but I am very familiar with the ministry, Crown Financial Ministries, and our guest is Chuck Bentley. He's CEO of that organization. Of course, many of you know of Larry Burkett and then Howard Dayton, who headed up that ministry, and now Chuck is there and very ably, as I understand, leading the ministry, which was founded in 1976. It now reaches around the world. There's staff on every continent, of course, a media presence throughout. And Chuck, thank you so much for joining me today.
It is my great honor to be with you to help you celebrate your 45th year. You referenced our 41st anniversary. I know that Larry and Marlon Maddox were personal friends, and both were in the NRB Hall of Fame, so it's a real honor to join you today.
They're both in a Hall of Fame, and, Marlon I was with the broadcast working full-time here, and now I'm more just here and there coming in and hosting the show. But Marlon was a real mentor of mine, and Larry Burkett, of course, he was a pioneer in many ways, and many of the financial principles that he taught back then were things that I incorporated, my husband and I, into our life. And, they've helped us. And that's one of the things we will talk about. But I just want to kind of go general at first with you, Chuck, about giving and finances, because I posted today at pointofview.net an article out of the Wall Street Journal from a few weeks ago, and it's entitled Philanthropy Booms in the Trump Era, but it also gets political. And one thing that's happened under President Trump is that, of course, the left has come out and funded their organizations. When you think of the ACLU or Planned Parenthood or many of the foundations, the George Soros-funded groups, the money is pouring into these groups right now because they see a threat to sort of their hold on things. And have you also noticed that in some of the effects of that?
Oh, absolutely, Pina. We're seeing a lot of giving both directions, and people are trying to magnify their influence through their giving, whether it's charitably or the investments that they're making or the lobbying that they're doing, because we all know that there's a great battle going on, and that battle, as you said, it's a timeless battle. It's between what's true and what is a lie. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about Point of View, because you truly do get on the air day after day after day and relentlessly defend what is true. And the world has to operate according to what is true. God told us what truth is. He told us that it was best for us to follow the truth and to know it and to live by it, and that it was all embodied in him. And some of those truths obviously get manifest in the political sphere through government policy. And so people are lining up, and they're saying, I want to support what we believe to be true, and that happens on both sides of the aisle. And it is no surprise to me that giving is booming right now.
When government steps back from things, which is what conservatives ask government to do, and we try to defund lots of areas of government, and, of course, the big debate about the tax cut now and spending coming here at the end of the year are part of that. But private money often fills the void, and certainly that's a good thing in a sense when you're advocating for conservative values and you're funding conservative organizations. But when you see the left being funded and you see all these groups that actually, I think they live, Chuck, in la-la land sometimes about some of their ideas. And one of the ideas, when you mentioned truth, that I think our culture has trouble with is there's an amount of money that you have either in a country's budget or a personal budget, and you need to supposedly live within that, but we don't tend to do that either as a country and often as families.
Well, you see, there is a level of paradox here because our government obviously has very low savings, or what I would say no savings. Our government spends more than it takes in. It has been doing that since the mid-'70s. We haven't even been able to agree to balance the budget, much less balance the budget, much less reduce our debt. So we have no savings and high spending and high debt. But typically the American family looks the exact same way. So it's difficult for us to cast stones at those in Washington when we're not applying those principles in our own life, because we're a country right now of the lowest savings rate in the developed world. We have high debt per family. We also have high expenses per family. 75, 76% of Americans now surveyed say that they're living from paycheck to paycheck. And that's unprecedented. You know, that's not the way this country was founded. We're a rich nation. We're the richest country in the history of mankind, but we're being poor stewards. And the real issue, the real dissonance that we all feel is, where's the steward? Where's the steward that's going to be put in charge that will say this has to be corrected? And I keep looking for somebody to run on that platform, that they simply want to be a good steward of this nation's resources and to do the right things according to what God said are good and healthy for a nation.
And, of course, here at Point of View, we try to be good stewards. I mean, we really have to be. We are funded by the gifts of listeners. And, you know, a lot of ministries across the country, Chuck, are in the same situation. So they have to say, okay, this is how much I got last year as gifts. And so we plan our expenditures and our budget based on that. And so that's why it's important for our supporters to step up, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and I love to help raise money for Point of View, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Not only are we friends and we appreciate the relationship that we have with you guys, but I've been around Point of View for many, many years. I was just doing a little back of napkin calculating here, and when you started in 1972, I was a sophomore in high school. So that helps me realize the great, long, beneficial impact that you've had on this country. Richard Nixon was president. The Vietnam War was going on when you started. I was concerned about being drafted. American Pie by Don McLean was at the top of the charts. And Explo 72 was happening. The Jesus movement was starting.
Hey, Chuck, thank you for taking us back down memory lane. We're going to do a little bit more of that. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, numerous changes and revelations about sexual harassment are now bringing out people trying to affix blame. In the past, we blamed the perpetrator. Unfortunately, that has changed. Charlie Rose exposed himself to women who work for him. When he issued an apology, it ended up being more of a non-apology. The most important line was this: All of us, including me, are coming to a newer and deeper recognition of the pain caused by conduct in the past and have a profound new respect for women and their lives. You have to roll your eyes at the phrase all of us. No, all of us weren't engaging in behavior that got you fired at CBS and PBS. Please don't pin your behavior on the rest of us. Another response has been virtue signaling. If you check social media, you will find lots of men posting comments in order to repent on behalf of all men. Men they say are gross, lustful, and disgusting. But women, remember, we're on your side and abhor what our fellow males want to do to you. The solution to the problem of sexual harassment is twofold. First, we need to place blame where it belongs, on the perpetrators. Human sinfulness, unleashed in a world without moral rules, results in what we are reading about each day in newspapers and websites. That brings us to the second solution, moral rules. The leaders of the sexual revolution have thrown out nearly every moral rule for sexual behavior. Anything goes as long as it's consensual. But what does that even mean when men and women willingly engage in all sorts of sexual behavior? Words like virtue, chivalry, propriety were thrown out the window years ago. No wonder so many men believe that they can do just about anything sexually and get away with it. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview and co-host of the Daily Breakpoint Commentaries. To Kirby Anderson and the entire Point of View radio team, I want to say congratulations for 45 years of defending faith, family, and freedom.
Well, John Stonestreet, of course, is another frequent guest here on Point of View, and we're grateful for his good wishes. Chuck Bentley is with me. He's with Crown Financial Ministries, and he's been a great sort of booster of Point of View. And the financial principles that he teaches across the world and through the ministry are universal. And as we mentioned in the first segment, they apply across the ages. And when we step over them, in a sense, we lose and we hurt. And so, we have been talking about how much tax to cut, how much taxes are appropriate, when to raise taxes, what about the deficit, spending more, of course, than you bring in. And all of those things are things that Chuck Bentley is an expert in. But, Chuck, I want to go back a little bit since we're talking about Point of View in 45 years. And this is going back probably 15 years or so, an interview I did with Steve Forbes. I guess you don't really have to talk about who he is, but he, a few times back then, ran for president. He was talking great financial, really common sense. And here he is talking about taxes. Steve, this is Penna Dexter, and last week the IRS tried, through regulations, to raise taxes on small businesses. There were no congressional hearings, no vote by Congress, and yet they tried to go ahead and do this, and you were really instrumental in stopping that, weren't you?
Well, fortunately, we had done my new group, Americans for Hope, Growth, and Opportunity, had done a memo about this attempt for a stealth tax increase. As you know, they tried to do this through Congress 3 years ago. Congress said no, so they're trying to do it in the middle of the night. And fortunately, others got a hold of it. They broadcast it, small business people rose up in arms, and Newt Gingrich has made it clear that he and the Republican leadership and rank and file are going to do everything they can to block this attempt to raise taxes on the biggest creators of jobs in America, small businesses.
What was the actual tax increase?
Well, what it would do is, with limited partners, is to apply the payroll tax to money that the partnership retains, money that you haven't received. So with some people, small restaurateurs and the like, the tax increase would have been in a range of 30 to 40% by the seemingly complicated regulation. Small business people understood right away what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
It seems to me that we have to be very vigilant, because I imagine that this will not be the last attempt to raise taxes by the IRS.
No way. And if they've tried it this way, you're guaranteed they're going to be trying it other ways. And also, too, even when Congress passes something in these 500 or 1,000-page bills, it's amazing what can slip by in the middle of the night.
Amazing. Chuck Bentley is my guest. Of course, that interview was done during the Clinton administration. Now, Chuck, we have a president who says he really ran on lowering taxes for corporations and for individuals. The Senate came up with its plan over the weekend. Now the House and Senate have to get together. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, my thoughts are that the government is moving in the right direction. I think that we all recognize that a lower tax burden on American people would be a blessing not only to the individuals but also to our country. Our government tends to respond like a person does when they come in for financial counseling. Most people take the posture, believe if they just made a little bit more money, that they would be able to solve all their financial problems. So they seldom want to go through the pain or the discipline of looking at the expense side of the problem. And our government has been unwilling to do that. They've been unwilling to look at their spending and to rein in their policies so that they can live within their means. And this is a step that would require them to think about not only blessing the American taxpayer and also the small businesses, which Steve Forbes is correct, create the jobs, create the strength of this economy, and they need to be able to grow. But it would also put the government in a position to become better stewards. If they're willing to take less tax, then they're going to have to spend less money. And ultimately, I think that's all a step in the right direction. I'm obviously a fiscal conservative because I believe that the Bible teaches that we should be conservative, that stewardship is the way that God brings his blessings to the world. He entrusts his funds to those who are faithful with it.
Some of the debate over this thing, Chuck, has been how much of a deficit or how much we should increase the deficit with this. Because if you look at the numbers and you don't consider that a tax cut would stimulate the economy, then you have about a $1.5 trillion increase in the deficit. And, that kind of gets us grinding our teeth and a little bit nervous about this. And, what I'm thinking when I see that is, okay, and at the end of the year, we have our spending bills that we have to approve. And so, how about let's put a little more emphasis on just cutting and reducing spending, moving back within our means. I mean, it's like the question here that everyone's asking is how much to increase the deficit. How about just let's do some major reduction in spending?
Well, there's two schools of thought when it comes to the federal deficit. One school is that debt matters and it's a problem that needs to be managed well. And the other school of thought is debt doesn't matter. And we've had Nobel Prize winners, people who are very brilliant economists, make the statement that the American debt doesn't matter. In fact, I remember, and I can't cite the exact source, but I do remember listening to Donald Trump before he was a presidential candidate saying that the American debt doesn't matter. And the philosophy is that we have so many assets to counterbalance the borrowing that people aren't looking at. So as a business owner, you have a balance sheet. And if your assets are greater than your debts, then everybody says you're fine, you can borrow more money. So that's the camp of the debt doesn't matter. I think the debt matters from a biblical standpoint. If we read Deuteronomy 28, the Lord said that if we will obey his principles, and in his principles he tells us that we should avoid debt, we should be very, very cautious with debt because it would lead to slavery. And if we will abide by his principles, we will lend to many nations, but we will borrow from none. And he was talking to the nation of Israel of how to avoid economic slavery. and that was to avoid debt. So I'm in the camp that debt matters. I think it's never a good plan to increase the federal debt. I think somebody's going to have to pay for it. I think the next generation is already strapped with more debt than they'll ever be able to repay. The math just doesn't work anymore, and I'm looking for somebody who will admit to that and go to Washington and help us to turn back the spending so that our deficits don't continue to increase.
You know, it's been interesting to watch the Congress because you have had a few senators stand up and make that case. And, of course, then other conservatives were mad at them for, perhaps and possibly derailing the tax cut. So the tax cut has been the goal. But and so it seems like that reducing the debt has kind of gone into the background as a goal right now. I hope that doesn't remain the same. But let's just pivot a little bit before the break to personal debt, household finance, and household debt. It can really get people into trouble, can't it?
Yes, it can be. And we're at a time when it's really unprecedented that Americans have lots of income but very little margin. I like to say we're flush with money, but we have no margin. And that's because we tend to view debt as a necessary part of our lives. People think it's impossible to live without debt. And so everything, in fact, I just did my own radio program just the last couple of days on how many things are being financed in our country. And right now there's a new company that allows you to finance the purchase of a pet. So we found, all kinds of ways to lend money in this country. And unfortunately, most Americans are taking people up on that. We're now financing cars at the length that we used to finance homes. I remember when I was growing up, if you got a 2-year car note, that seemed like a really long time to financing a car. And now you're seeing them leases go on and on and on. We're seeing standard rental or borrowing terms of about 5 to 7 years. I think the 90-year mortgage is coming to America the way it exists in Japan today, where it's a generational mortgage. Wow. I think we're going to see that come.
All right. Well, within all of this, there's another component to the personal finance that would be, in a sense, biblical, God's plan, and that is that there's a portion of that is given back to him, isn't there?
Well, I think giving is the highest and best use of money. I think the Lord makes it very clear when he said it's more blessed to give than to receive, that's to our advantage to be givers. And so in my own life and in the teaching of Crown, we ask people to orient their life around giving, not around gaining, not around hoarding, not around building your net worth, but how much can you give? Or the real question is not how much should we give, but how much should we keep?
Yeah.
It all belongs to the Lord.
Well, so we're going to pick up on that after the break, Chuck, because there's a lot more to be said about this principle of giving. And we've got the expert with us, Chuck Bentley. Stay with us for more of Point of View. We'll be right back.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And my guest is Chuck Bentley, CEO of Crown Financial Ministries. We're talking in this portion of the program about giving. And, money and resources, Chuck, are throughout the Bible. Stories about how they're used, stories about how they should and shouldn't be used. And we're to be stewards of the blessings that God gives us. And sometimes we don't feel like we're rich and we can't afford to give, but God's principles stand, don't they?
Absolutely, Pina. It's interesting that you point out that we never feel like we're rich. That is a phenomenon in our society because we live in a comparative culture where it's sort of easy to access some knowledge or information about what other people have, and a lot of it is on display by their lifestyles. Even people with a lot of money don't feel like they're wealthy. But if we do a bigger picture analysis, we're the wealthiest people in the history of mankind. We live, more comfortably and with more access to an ease of lifestyle than people have for centuries in all of history. Even those who are suffering, and I don't diminish their suffering in any way, but even those who suffer in our country and in our culture have it far better than people in many parts of the world where there are billions who are not sure if they can live from one day to the next. We worry about living from paycheck to paycheck. Many parts of the world worry about living day to day for even having something to eat and having to make a terrible decision whether to go to work or to walk to the doctor, and both of those could prove to be deadly. So, yes, we're very, very fortunate. We're very blessed, and we need to recognize that, and we need to become liberal givers. We need to be liberal in our giving and do so in a way that is that creates cheerfulness. And I think cheerfulness comes from understanding that there's a purpose accomplished by our giving, that the kingdom of God grows. And I was not managing the clock well earlier, Pina, but I wanted to say that if I look at Point of View personally, because we are members of the Truth Team, my wife and I personally are part of the Truth Team. And so when I speak about giving to Point of View for others, it's not because we're just friends. It's because I believe in what you're doing, and I've invested it there. And I like to say if you just did radio, your ministry would be worth it. And if you just were writing your articles and sharing your insightful biblical opinions, your ministry would be worth it. If you were just having the influence on policy in D.C. that you have, your ministry would be worth it. But, you do so many other things. You're discipling these millennials. How desperately does our country need to have the strong foundation of truth imparted to this next generation? And you and Kirby and the team, Kelly, are all investing in the future leaders of this country. So I personally consider Point of View a great place to invest kingdom capital. I believe that you're doing a wonderful job. You're great stewards of the money that you have, that people are giving. And you're on the issues of our day. When the program opens, all these topics that you guys cover so beautifully with such a depth of knowledge, I think you're an essential part of what I want to see happen in this country. And as you pointed out, this new wave of giving this year, I want to see a lot of that giving come towards Point of View. I want to see those people who've been blessed by your organization, who appreciate it. Maybe they sort of passively listen. They've never called. They've never written. Maybe they've never even been to your website. But they hear the program and they appreciate it, but they haven't taken action. Well, this is a good day to say, I want to become a part of that team. And you lay out some very simple ways for people to do that. And I want to put my full endorsement behind your organization, as so many have. Say, we need you. We need what you do as members of the body of Christ.
Well, thank you for the endorsement. And, I often think about giving in that way because I enjoy, in a sense, being a conduit for God to pour resources, whether it be, just a very small amount for a family living on very little or someone who has more. But to say, okay, this ministry, I could never do what they're doing. Or this guy is actually going over and starting seminaries in Russia, or, whatever is happening. And you know that you're a limited person, and this is where God has put you in this world. But through you, God can do these things that are, very much in his will and in his plan.
Well, I think of the parable of the talents in light of what you were just saying, Pina, because in the parable of the talents, one was given 5, another 2, and another 1. And it was odd that many people think that, the Lord always will take from the rich and give to the poor. Well, in this case, if you say that was a wealthy with 5, middle class with 2 talents, and a poor with 1 talent, he actually took from the poor and gave to the rich.
Mm-hmm.
He
did.
It around. I think Robin Hood is a fantasy anyway, and sometimes our politicians think that the tax system should work like Robin Hood. But what God did is he took it from the unfaithful and gave it to the faithful. It's not about how much they have, but whether or not they were faithful with what they have. And the one with only 1 talent had this excuse. He said, well, I didn't really trust you. I didn't think you were going to be just. So here's your money back. I didn't spend it on myself, but it's yours. And he said, no, you should have put it on loan with the banker where it had earned some interest. And there are people who aren't going to Russia. There are people who aren't going to Washington, D.C. There are people who are not gifted at making the debate that you guys are able to so skillfully make, but they want to make a difference. And what you are, you represent the banker in this parable, that people can give to the organization and say, but I want to support what you're able to do better than I am. And that's why I would support you. That's why I do support you, because you do it better than I could. I have a niche in the body of Christ, and I enjoy my space. I enjoy what I get to do. But I really appreciate and respect what you and Kirby and Kelly are doing. And that's why I think so many of your listeners need to step up. It's so easy to listen and to benefit and to think, well, it's just radio. Well, radio costs money. It costs a lot of money to be in radio. I still think it's one of the most effective mediums in America to reach people. It's still enormously effective, but it costs money, and we need to invest it if we're a part of the audience out there that's being blessed by your work.
I look at radio sometimes, Chuck, and I think really, yes, it does cost a lot of money to do radio, but there's such a multiplier with radio, because you could go to a church and speak to a sanctuary full of people. You could go to a living room and speak to, a group of ladies about the issues that face them and their families. You could even go to a stadium and give a message, but you can reach multiplied more people through radio. So the money that goes into radio is actually, it's a very good steward of money, because it's multiplied. And with Point of View, we're on over 300 stations, so our message goes across the country.
Well, if we were to put all the listeners in a football stadium and people could see every day the stadium after stadium after stadium that's full of people tuning in, they would have maybe a totally different perspective on how good of a steward you guys are with your resources. But you are reaching so many people. You're reaching them daily. You're doing what the Lord said to do, which is to disciple people with his word and with his truth. You're helping them to know how to be involved, how to take the action that we so desperately need in this country. And, I think government obviously has its spot. I think government is ordained by God to do the role that the Bible says that they should do. But also the grassroots has our place. And the greatest change in this country is going to happen by people who are listening to the radio right now. Those people who are a part of the body of Christ, who are strong proponents of the truth, who say, I not only want to receive it myself, I want to see it put into policy. I want to see it transform these areas where there's so many problems in our country where truth is not being upheld, whether that's at the Supreme Court or whether it's in an individual's life who's been taken captive by some stronghold or deception on one of these topics. That's the power of radio, and it's the good work that Point of View is doing for 45 years, and we want to see it continue.
Okay, folks, Chuck Bentley is my guest, and we're going to get a little bit more personal and family after the break. During the break, you might want to go to pointofview.net, and number one, check out our donate button. You can join the Truth Team. You can give a one-time gift. It's very easy if you just go to pointofview.net. We make it easy. We also have a line you could call, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. 888-866-5151. But this piece that I posted is Ask Chuck. This is from Chuck Bentley's. I don't know if this is really a question you were asked, Chuck. You can answer this after the break, or if this is just a technique to teach a very good lesson. Lessons from an NFL quarterback's car. And I think it teaches the lessons of family finance and how we're to live under our income, not, take it right up to the line or go over what we make. And this is a lesson that, we all need to learn and teach our kids. So we'll talk about that right after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View. We'll be right back with Chuck Bentley.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Can county commissioners open their own meetings with prayer? The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit recently prohibited Rowan County's commissioners from opening their meetings with prayer. But the federal courts of appeal are split over whether prayers offered by legislators at local government meetings are unconstitutional. In another one of our cases, Bournemouth versus County of Jackson, the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit approved of the very same practice. Opening government meetings with prayer is a centuries-old tradition that goes back to before the founding of our nation and continues to this day before Congress, state houses, and thousands of local governments across the country. It shouldn't be very controversial. The Supreme Court previously approved of the long-standing tradition of legislative prayer and its role in solemnizing policymaking sessions, encouraging lawmakers to selflessly seek the greater good, and acknowledging the role that faith plays in the lives of millions of Americans. In 1983 in Marsh v. Chambers and then again in Town of Greece v. Galloway, the Supreme Court held that prayers offered by private citizens before government meetings are fully consistent with the Constitution and an important part of America's history and heritage. But what if that citizen is an elected official? That's the question we hope the Supreme Court will now answer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, this is June Hunt from Hope for the Heart. Congratulations to my friend Kirby Anderson and to Point of View for 45 years of broadcasting.
45 years of broadcasting. It's hard to believe. And I feel old. I haven't even been around for half of that time. But I have been around a long time, and Marlon Maddox was a great mentor. Kirby Anderson, too. And Kirby has just taken this show and run with it since the death of Marlon Maddox. Of course, he was part of things well before that because Marlon believed in building a team. And so, you know, a lot of you just benefit from the wisdom and just the diverse knowledge of Kirby Anderson. I get to sit in his seat today, and Chuck Bentley is my guest. And Chuck, I'd love to go to kind of personal finance a little bit. And if folks want to ask a question of this expert, give us a call at 800-351-1212. That's our call-in line. But we've posted something from you. Ask Chuck, lessons from an NFL quarterback's car. And this is about Washington Redskins quarterback Kirk Cousins, who is not your typical NFL player with regard to the way he lives, is he?
No, not at all. You asked before the break if people actually ask me questions, and they do. I publish a weekly column at the Christian Post, and it's called Ask Chuck, so people submit questions.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so we get to answer some very interesting questions, and a lot of times celebrities and people in the mainstream of news are the focus of those questions. And, of course, Kirk Cousins is a tremendous example of a good steward. He's a member of the NFL. He's earning, I think, $24 million this year, but he drives his grandmother's GMC van that he calls the Gray Ghost, and it has 100,000 miles on it. I think he bought it for $5,000. And nobody would ever dream that somebody with that kind of money would be that frugal. But he was raised in a pastor's home. His dad taught him to manage money according to the Scripture. He believes in giving. His highest priority is to be a giver. He knows he's going to give an account before the Lord for what he was given. And he knows that typically a career in the NFL is very, very short. I think it lasts 3 to 5 years for most players now, because it's a dangerous sport. So he's not taking anything for granted. And he's saving this money. He and his wife already have a child, but they still live, I think, in the basement of one of their parents at their choice, just so that they're not living extravagantly beyond their means. So there's a great meekness to the way he's decided to manage his resources, all for a better cause, not just to say that he wants to hoard money, but he wants to invest in God's kingdom.
You know, I found out something recently that I did not know, and that is, of course, the Dallas Cowboys' famous quarterback Roger Staubach actually began in the real estate business while he was playing in the NFL, and he knew back then the same principle that Kirk Cousins knows, and that is that your career doesn't last forever. And so, the rest is history with Roger Staubach and his massive real estate empire that he sold for like $600 million. So, it was wise, because you do see a lot of NFL players end up broke. But take this to the normal family that doesn't earn $24 million a year. And, when you're raising your kids, even I've got young married kids, and I look at them and they're, trying to make ends meet financially, and thinking it's really a blessing in a sense to learn how to make do with little, because if you can always live under your income, you will never be bankrupt. You will never be really poor. You'll always be able to handle an emergency. Sometimes the emergency is just unbelievably huge, and that's a different time when you have to just trust the Lord for that. But really, in so many cases, people can live a fairly prosperous life simply by learning early on to live under their means.
Well, the simplest and clearest principles, I think, regarding stewardship, Penna, are first, we're to have a faithful heart. That means we're to be faithful to God in the way that we give. Giving is our top priority. We're to be cheerful about it. It's to be first. We're to honor God with our giving, and we're to give where we're being fed, so that those sources where we're being fed can continue. And so that's the first principle with being a good steward. The second is we're to be disciplined with our hands. And the Bible teaches throughout the Scripture that we're to be savers, not just save a little money one time, but actually make it a part of our lifestyle where we're continually saving so that we're prepared for the unexpected. We should be the ones when the disasters happen that we're standing ready to help, standing ready to give. And, of course, that's what's happening. When the great flood happened in Houston, 80% of the aid that rushed into the city to help were people in faith-based organizations. So those two principles demonstrate the wisdom of God. And so the advice I would give to anybody, whether they're a young family or an old family, is to make giving your top priority. That breaks the bondage of materialism over your heart. You want to be faithful to God first. And secondly, you want to have the discipline to save. And if you will set a goal to save $1,000, and our organization is set up to help people to learn to do that, if you'll save $1,000, you'll be in the top 25% of Americans that have no, that with savings in the bank. So many have no savings today. They're living on credit cards and trying to pay down balances in order to have any margin. So save $1,000 and set it aside. And then what it took to save that $1,000, you now have the discipline and the know-how to save the next $1,000. And I tell people, if you can save $10, you can save $100. If you can save $100, you can save $1,000. If you can save $1,000, you can save $10,000. And that will enable you to be in a position to serve God's purposes without financial bondage. It will teach you the lessons of living beneath your means as you're trying to teach your children, and also to be prepared for the future. So those are the two key ingredients in what we're trying to help the body of Christ to learn in this country and around the world.
I might mention that in addition to the column with the Christian Post and all the materials that are spread and distributed by Crown Financial Ministries, Chuck Bentley is host of a daily national radio broadcast called My Money Life. And this is where he teaches these principles. And these are life-changing principles, aren't they, Chuck?
Well, God gave them to us for our own benefit. Larry Burkett used to say that there's commands in the Scripture that they are must-dos, and then there are principles which they are God's recommendation for what he said would be good for us. And I love the way he described that because it makes you want to go and look them up. I mean, there are hundreds of financial principles in the Proverbs alone, but there are literally thousands of financial principles from Genesis to Revelation. And what we've decided to do as an organization is to make those accessible so that they can be applied to our practical our circumstances, and we can apply them to our life. And over our 41 years, Penna, we've seen literally billions of dollars go into God's kingdom by teaching people to live beneath their means, to be faithful to God first, and to have the discipline to manage their money differently than the world teaches them to manage it. And so that gives me the joy to come along a program like Point of View and to say, I like what Point of View is doing. I hope people that maybe Crown has taught, Crown has influenced, Larry Burkett has taught through the years, I hope they're listening right now. And they will join me to say, Point of View is important to the body of Christ. It's important to the direction of this country. It's important to address these policies from a biblical point of view and to get the truth out there in a post-truth culture. And so the three ways that you offer people to do that are $1 a day to give, $1 a day. I love that. That makes it very easy. And then the Anniversary Club, $45 a month to represent the 45th anniversary of the organization. And in the Century Club, those who will step up and give $100 a month. I want to invite people to join you to do that, and thank you for what you're doing in this country.
Chuck, and thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been great to get to know you on the radio, and God bless you.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kirby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kirby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic. I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. Thanks for sticking with us for the second hour. This week, all week, we are celebrating, sort of reminiscing, because this is the 45th year that Point of View has been broadcasting. And Kirby Anderson is not in the studio today, so I'm here. I'm so happy I get to talk about these things. And we're going to look back at a couple of issues, because the issues sometimes don't change. They may have new wrinkles, new aspects to them, but we're always battling the same thing. And one is spending more than we have as a nation. And I do want to mention, though, before I get too far into this, that in the next segment, Laurie is going to join us. He's the senior pastor of Harvest Christian Fellowship, which has campuses in California and Hawaii. He's a prolific author, and he's also founder and featured speaker for Harvest Crusades and Harvest America. Kirby talks with him often. He'll be joining us a little bit later. But I do want to talk a bit about the tax bill. The Senate actually passed one. They came together on something. And, of course, now they'll be joining with the House in some sort of a conference and figuring out what the final bill will be for both houses to vote on and then to send to the president. And, of course, a lot of talk about deficits. And, you know, right after they get done with that, they're going to be passing some spending bills. And we never seem to be able to kind of crack the nut of entitlement spending. That's one. And there are a lot of other areas, I think, where our government spends money that government has no business being involved in or thinking that they have to provide for. And so, you know, that's really sort of, if you want to go to the basic foundation of the problem, there's so much nuance to it, of course, and that's what we've been hearing from Congress. But I think we do have a problem with just the role of government itself. And on that note, let's take a call from Susan in the state of Texas. Hi, Susan.
Hi. You just said what I was thinking about.
Oh, I didn't want to steal your thunder. Explain.
Oh, no,
Explain.
I'm glad you did. What made me first look at it was, do you remember when Ron Paul was running for president?
Sure.
He was criticizing expenditures overseas, and they said, well, you don't want us to spend money on this, and you don't want us to spend money on that. What do you want us to spend money on? And he said, well, maybe you could read the Constitution. And that, you know, of course, Article 1, Section 8 tells, well, the preamble I was reading tells the 6 purposes of even having a central government at all that the founders started. And probably started out with a Treasury Department with maybe 40 people in it, a general ledger, and a checkbook. And now it probably has 2,000 people in it. And then when the big industrial revolution came and they got actual adding machines, they might have added some more people. You know, it was so simple.
It's a far cry from where we are.
Yeah, and then they had the Department of Defense, which would be an expense that they are legitimately to spend my tax money on, and then they had the Department of the Interior. And there was nothing about what you just said, like the Department of Education. I was thinking they had this novel thought that maybe the parents would take care of the education of their children.
What a concept.
What a concept. And and then the federal government, of course, would have nothing to do with that. And then I love this one, the Department of Health and Human services. What does that even mean? What do they have, a Department of Health and Reptile Services? We're humans.
It used to be the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, but then they spun off the Department of Education, and then they changed the name to HHS. So, they keep on, really, it's always adding people and responsibilities. Susan, you made a really good point. Thank you so much for calling.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is our 45th year of broadcasting, and as I mentioned, we are just throughout the show, throughout the week, we're going to look back. And so I want to go back to an interview that Kirby did with Mitt Romney. He was between his two runs for the president. I think this interview took place in 2010. He ran in 2008, and in 2012, he came to the studio and spoke with Kirby. And let's just get a quick clip from that.
Privileged to have Mitt Romney in studio with us for a little bit longer as we talk about his book, No Apology, The Case for American Greatness. And certainly we've talked about some of the foreign policy issues, some of the economic issues. Let's talk about health care. And it illustrates, again, the frustration, Governor Romney, that people have. I've got two articles here. One that came out 2 days ago, Wall Street Journal, Grace Marie Turner, The Failure of Romney Care. The one that came out just more recently by Tim Murphy, Truth About Massachusetts Health Care Reform. We'll post both of them and let people read, because obviously they disagree, but a lot of people say there seems to be a lot of similarity between what happened in Massachusetts when you were governor and what President Obama is proposing. We all recognize that the legislature took it in directions you didn't want to go, but how do you respond given the fact that you've got a pro and con article coming out in two different journals within almost days of each other?
Well, it's interesting. When I was actually running for president in 2008, in the debates, I was asked more than once, tell us about your Massachusetts health care plan. I described it with great interest and a great deal of pride. There wasn't much interest in what I was talking about then. But right now, given what Obama is doing, everybody is politicizing, if you will, and in some respects distorting the story of what happened in Massachusetts. There are some similarities between the plan that we put in place and President Obama's plan. It's the similarity of a horse and a donkey, however. They're very different animals. I like our horse a lot better than I like his donkey. And in fact, what we did was done in 70 pages of legislation. His is a 2,000-page gargantuan federal government takeover of states' rights, as well as the entire 18% of our economy that's associated with health care. What we did is we got people that weren't insured before insured, which is a good thing. That means that no longer are there free riders in Massachusetts that show up at the hospital and expect the taxpayers to pick up their bill. We did not do the things that the president's doing, such as putting a $500 billion tax on the American people.
Wow. It's interesting to hear Mitt Romney talk about Romney Care. A lot of us thought Romney Care was sort of the inspiration for Obamacare, and his answer there didn't really convince me otherwise. But it is fun to look back and see, some of the issues that faced us back then. And the idea to say that Romney Care wasn't a tax, didn't impose a tax, and yet Obamacare did. Romney Care ended up being a failure, never went anywhere. And why didn't we learn from it? It was actually financially unsustainable in Massachusetts, but we didn't learn that lesson. So, it's there are a lot of sort of sad lessons learned from this and from the experience in Massachusetts. We're now learning it federally. But the question I kind of ask here too with healthcare, and it jumps off of what Susan stated so eloquently in her call, and that is, since when is it a federal responsibility for the government to be in charge of the healthcare of the citizens of the country? Certain times, of course, there are those that are needy, and the government will have to step in, but we've gone way beyond that. So, ladies and gentlemen, just another blast from the past. We'll have more before the end of the program, but next up, Greg Laurie is going to join me, so I hope that you will stay with me. And also to think about our website, because today is kind of special. Not only do we have our guests and some great articles up there, we also have Chuck Bentley's piece on the NFL Redskins quarterback, the way he lives in such a frugal manner, and a lot more. So stay with us for Point of View. We'll be back after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, numerous changes and revelations about sexual harassment are now bringing out people trying to affix blame. In the past, we blamed the perpetrator. Unfortunately, that has changed. Charlie Rose exposed himself to women who work for him. When he issued an apology, it ended up being more of a non-apology. The most important line was this: all of us, including me, are coming to a newer and deeper recognition of the pain caused by conduct in the past and have a profound new respect for women and their lives. You have to roll your eyes at the phrase, all of us. No, all of us weren't engaging in behavior that got you fired at CBS and PBS. Please don't pin your behavior on the rest of us. Another response has been virtue signaling. If you check social media, you will find lots of men posting comments in order to repent on behalf of all men. Men they say are gross, lustful, and disgusting. But women, remember, we're on your side and abhor what our fellow males want to do to you. The solution to the problem of sexual harassment is twofold. First, we need to place blame where it belongs, on the perpetrators. Human sinfulness, unleashed in a world without moral rules, results in what we are reading about each day in newspapers and websites. That brings us to the second solution: moral rules. The leaders of the sexual revolution have thrown out nearly every moral rule for sexual behavior. Anything goes as long as it's consensual. But what does that even mean when men and women willingly engage in all sorts of sexual behavior? Words like virtue, chivalry, propriety were thrown out the window years ago. No wonder so many men believe that they can do just about anything sexually and get away with it. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, everybody, this is Kirk Cameron. I am so honored to be able to talk with Kirby on Point of View, and I just want to congratulate him and the entire program on 45 years of discussing the issues and inspiring the rest of us. God bless you guys.
Hearing from Hollywood, and we may hear a little bit more about Hollywood later in the program. We're going to discuss this movie about Steve McQueen, who a lot of people don't know, but actually became a Christian later in his life. And of course, if you don't know who Steve McQueen is, I'm dating myself because I do, big time. But, you know, you're looking back to the history of Point of View, one big presidency that took place during my time here was that of George W. Bush. We watched his campaign, and we watched his winning and 8 years in office, and, of course, the whole fight over the election with Al Gore, whether who the winner was, and there was a lot of excitement. 9/11 happened during his presidency, and so it's kind of fun to look back. We did do an interview with the Governor Bush, during the campaign. It was just before the 2000 election. Marlon and I got to interview him by phone. But you won't hear my voice here because Marlon hogged that interview big time. Actually, I did get to ask some questions, but they're not in these sound bites. So let's go now and listen to just a clip from that interview with George W. Bush on the campaign trail.
Our guest, Governor George W. Bush. Governor, you know, both you and Vice President Al Gore talk about families. You talk about working families. The load that families have to carry today, and you both are trying to say, look, I'm in there pitching for families. How does your program differ from the Vice President's?
Well, take, for example, tax relief.
I think the true test of a leader is who do you trust. I want the American people to have more of their own money back. If you're a family of four making $50,000, you get a 50% cut in your federal income taxes. Your tax load goes from about $4,000 a year to about $2,000. Under the Vice President's plan, 50 million Americans receive no tax relief at all. And that's a fundamental difference. Secondly, today, for example, Marla, I laid out an interesting issue, an interesting opportunity, and that is we ought to have federal law changed to allow a person who earns overtime, works overtime, to be able to convert those overtime hours into comp time, if that's what they want to do, so they could then spend more time with their families. So there's two areas of disagreement, because the Vice President doesn't agree with that. He believes that if you work overtime, the only thing a worker should be able to do is take that overtime and pay. And I think a worker ought to have a choice.
Well, we did lower taxes twice under President George W. Bush, and, we talk about him. I think he's presented in a negative light right now, and in many ways. And yet, he did do some things that conservatives loved and that actually helped the economy. But I think one thing about President Bush is that he did major on the social issues that Christians care about. He spoke about them, and he actually acted on them in many ways. He was definitely a pro-life president. And so let's just go back and listen to one more clip from that interview that Marlon Maddox and I did with George W. Bush.
Our guest, Governor George W. Bush. Governor, you talk. I got a press release and talk about a 3-day tour that'll focus on policy initiatives designed, and I want to read some of the things that I've got in this press release, designed to prevent children from being robbed of their childhood,
right?
Reduce the influence of a culture that is sometimes too harmful for children, and then you also talk about drug abuse. These are things that are resonating with the American people, and I'm quite sure you're aware that once you begin talking like this, the press is going to beat you pretty hard over it.
That's okay. Well, I'm running for a reason. I mean, I'm not the kind of fellow that shies away. I tell people what I believe. It's like in that national debate, I said we need to change our culture in America. People need to be responsible for the decisions they make, and it starts with having responsible leadership. I also said we ought to have a national goal that children, born and unborn, ought to be protected in the law and welcome into life, and we ought to work to enhance the culture of life in America. So some people don't agree with that, but that's okay. That's what democracy is all about. And you bet. I think what I'm saying is government ought to stand on side by side with parents and help parents, and not. Because in some cases parents are being undermined when a kid turns on TV or listens to some of this music. And while I'm not for censorship in any way, shape, or form, I am for internet filters, for example, in public places where federal money will be spent, whether it be in schools or libraries. We ought to say we don't want pornography or violence coming in over the internet into those public places. And so I'm going to promote filters. I was in a school today, Helen Keller School in Royal Oak, Michigan, where they've got a filter system in their public school system, and it works pretty darn well. They're constantly monitoring the information the children see on their computers, and I was there to herald that program, and I think people appreciate this kind of values approach to public policy.
President George W. Bush speaking about values. This was on the campaign trail in 2000, October of 2000, just before that election, that historic election. And it's just one of the ways that we have and that we're using today to look back over 45 years of point of view. And another way that we're doing that is to bring in some guests who are frequently here with Kirby on the program. And one of them is with us now. His name is Greg Laurie, and he is the senior pastor of Harvest Christian Fellowship. They've got campuses in California, and I'm from California, so I remember Greg Laurie from my years there. He's also, and also Hawaii. He's authored over 70 books, and he has also worked in filmmaking, and he was in the studio, I think it was this summer, speaking with Kirby live here at the Point of View studio about a movie about Steve McQueen, which we're going to discuss here on the program. But Greg, thank you so much for joining us today on, during this week, we're just celebrating here the 45th year of Point of View.
Well, thank you for having me on, and congratulations. It's great to be on your show today.
Well, it's good to have you. Just kind of give us an update about your ministry, because, I grew up in Southern California, and I was far away from where your church was, but I certainly was a fan of yours. And so to watch now the work that God has done through you is encouraging. Just kind of give us an update.
Well, thanks for asking. Well, we're busy with Christmas, of course. We just had a big, giant Christmas tree lighting at our church last night. My goodness, I think 8,000 people showed up. It was a lot of fun. We reflected on the real meaning and message of Christmas. But, I've been pastor now for, about 43 years of the same church, and we run around 12 to 15,000 on an average weekend, and we do large evangelistic events in Southern California. In fact, we've been doing them consecutively now for like 27 years that are called SoCal Harvest. And in fact, to my understanding, it's the longest running consecutive evangelistic event in history because they're in a huge stadium. And then we go and do large mega stadiums periodically, like AT&T Stadium. And, as you know, we're coming back to AT&T next year in the month of June, on June 8th, for Harvest America again. And that was the largest crowd we've ever had in a stadium before. It was well over 100,000 and people in attendance there. But then it went out live to host sites around the country, and some 350,000 people watched the event live. So that was amazing. But the thing I was talking about recently was a Steve McQueen film, that we made a film about the conversion of Steve McQueen. And a lot of people don't know that Steve, who was then the #1 movie star in the world, came to faith in Christ, and his life was dramatically changed. But unfortunately, about 6 months after he came to faith, he found out he had cancer. Mm-hmm. And so we tell this story, and we made it into a documentary film, excuse me, and we showed it in theaters as a one-night Fathom event. And 125,000 people showed up in theaters across America. In fact, it was the #3 film in the whole country on that night. Blew our minds.
I want to jump in, Greg, because we're about on a break, but I want to get a read on what's coming up next with that film. I mean, that was such a great response. So now you've got to move forward and capitalize on that. And, Steve McQueen, I mean, he was just the epitome of manhood in a sense, also sometimes misbehavior in certain ways. And so a lot of people don't know that he became a Christian later in life, and we do want to get a little bit more about that story from you, and also more about the film and how people will be able to watch it down the road. So Greg Laurie is with me, and I just do want to mention we are celebrating the 45th anniversary of Point of View this year and this week, especially emphasizing that. If you want to help us financially, go to pointofview.net.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And my guest is Pastor Greg Laurie, Senior Pastor of Harvest Christian Fellowship, and a couple of the big projects we've been discussing here. And we'll get back to the Harvest Crusades and Harvest America in a moment. But just set us up for this Steve McQueen movie.
Yeah, sure, Penna. Well, Steve McQueen, of course, he's an icon. That's why we called this documentary film Steve McQueen, American Icon. Not everybody is an icon who was an actor from the 60s or 70s or any other decade, but some people, transcend time, like Elvis Presley or Johnny Cash and John Wayne and Steve McQueen. And so what is not known about Steve by many is the fact that he came to a full-blown commitment to Christ later in his life. He basically was at the top of his game. He was the #1 movie star in the world. He was charging $50,000 to just read a script. And so he just became disillusioned with Hollywood and literally walked away, moved to a little town called Santa Paula in California, which is sort of like small town USA. And he moved there because it was a place people who loved to fly airplanes lived, the antique airplane capital of the world. And Steve had become so proficient at racing cars and riding motorcycles, but the one thing he had never learned how to do was fly. So he bought an old Stearman biplane. And there was only one guy qualified to teach him how to fly that plane. And as it turns out, that man, whose name was Sammy Mason, was a very committed Christian. And it was through Sammy's life, example, and testimony that Steve was exposed to the gospel and ultimately went to Sammy's church and heard Sammy's pastor, Leonard DeWitt, share the gospel. And Steve McQueen prayed and asked Jesus Christ to come into his heart.
So this movie, you are involved as not only helping to produce this, you're actually in it, aren't you?
Well, yes, I'm sort of the host of the film. I drive a Bullitt Mustang, which is the name of the. It's in the film Bullitt. Steve McQueen drove a green Mustang, 1967 Highland Green Mustang, and now it's called the Bullitt Mustang because the film was called Bullitt. So I drive a replica of the Bullitt, and I interview different people that knew Steve, including his wife and friends of his stuntman, and I also interview Mel Gibson, who brings some interesting insight into Steve as an actor, as well as why he would have disconnected from Hollywood as he did. But ultimately, my objective in the film was to tell people how to come into a relationship with Jesus Christ. So the documentary film actually ends at Angel Stadium, where I'm talking about Steve's transformation and how people can believe in Jesus themselves. It's been very, very well received, and it's impacting lives even now.
How can people see it?
Well, before it was you have to go to the theater, but that's run. It's had its run, but it just came out in DVD. So if you go to our website, harvest.org, you can order your own copy or copies of the film. And by the way, Penna, I also wrote a book called Steve McQueen, The Salvation of an American Icon. So we have the book available. You can get the book at Amazon as well. But you can only get the film from Harvest Ministries. And ultimately, it's going to end up being distributed by Universal. It's going to be in all the Walmarts. And it will ultimately end up on Netflix. But for the moment, if you want to get the film in time for Christmas, just go to harvest.org and you can get your copies.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, what a great Christmas present. And you can also click through pointofview.net if you don't remember, but harvest.org is pretty easy to remember. Speaking of Harvest, you did mention and describe these evangelistic events that you hold. And, Billy Graham did that. And, I just so many people that I know were influenced by those. And it's still, there's a place in the culture for these big events to generate the excitement, to bring in talented people who can explain the gospel. It's still, we've been talking today about how certain things they don't go out of style, and this doesn't, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I think the way we present them should change. We have to adapt to cultural changes. There's obviously a lot of new platforms available that were not available in the day of Billy Graham. There was no Twitter in Billy's day, and Facebook and Instagram, et cetera. So we use all media platforms, including television, radio, social media, and we bring the gospel. But the timeless message of the gospel never changes. Culture changes, music changes, the gospel doesn't change, nor does the need of humanity. So really, when it's all said and done, the whole platform is put together. It's cutting edge, amazing music, technology, video, all the cool stuff that makes it interesting. But when it's all said and done, it's basically an opportunity for me to step up on that stage and tell people who Jesus is, what he said, and how to come into a relationship with him. And then I invite people to come to Christ, as Billy so faithfully did for so many years. And Billy has been a great influence on me, and it's been my privilege to get to know him over the years. And I spent a lot of time with him in the last years of his crusade ministry, actually helping him in crusade prep and sermon prep. And I would find him fresh, current illustrations, because as he was ending his crusade ministry, I was just starting mine. So I didn't realize it, but I was enrolled in the finest evangelistic university on planet Earth, hanging out with Billy Graham.
Wow.
And being a part of those crusades. So that was all prep for what I'm doing now. And really, a day doesn't go by where I don't draw on those experiences and things I learned from Billy that we're applying now.
Looking at the political culture today and the attacks that have taken place over the last many years on the rights of Christians to live according to their faith in many ways. I mean, I don't think there have been attacks. You may have local ordinances and things that you have to come up against to do your crusades, but otherwise, do you find that you're hamstrung by governments in doing what you do with regard to these big crusades?
Well, thankfully, the answer to that is largely no. We are able to, secure a venue and to hold an event and do what we feel we want to do. So I've had no interference with that. Of course, we're just dealing with a culture that's largely hostile to Christianity.
Right.
And so it's more that. It's just such a cultural trend against the Christian faith. You're probably aware of the fact that the largest growing religious group in America today are called the Nones, N-O-N-E-S. And these are people that are just floating about, taking little bits of different religious beliefs and kind of coming up with their own version of what faith is. And so, you just have a lot of folks here that don't know the gospel. They've never heard the gospel. And so we want to engage that culture. One of the reasons we made this film is we thought, well, how could we invade the world of non-believers more? And we thought, what better place than a movie theater? For many people, Penna, that's their church. They faithfully go every weekend to see the latest film. And so we were able to get some traction there, and we're always looking for ways to be more effective. But, I'm thankful that we have this freedom to do so in America, and I hope we never lose that freedom.
I think when you started your ministry, the culture in America, we still were majority a Christian consensus place. You might not have had Christians, but I think the gospel message came into the heart of people that basically understood right and wrong and truth. And that's no longer the case, is it?
Well, I would say the answer is no. But, I live in California.
Yeah.
So this has always been a really liberal state. I'm not like all y'all back there in Texas, where you still have, a stronger kind of family culture there and a faith culture there. But even in Texas, things are changing as they are around the United States. So, look, the only way we can really change people is their heart has to be changed. Our mission as Christians is to turn people into conservatives or Republicans, we want them to come to know Jesus. And I think if people know Jesus, it will change everything about them, starting with their worldview. and that will affect them in the way that they think, in the way that they live, in the way that they spend their money, and yes, in the way they vote. And so it should. But if we focus on that primarily, in my opinion, that's getting the cart before the horse. You know, so my job as an evangelist is I want to call people to Christ, and I don't want to burn every bridge to non-believers, you know, where they just think I'm coming into town to blast all the things I'm against. My main message is I'm for Christ, and he loves us, and people need to know him. So I try to build bridges to people as I communicate. But yes, I will say this. I don't think we've ever been more biblically illiterate than we are at this moment in American history.
Greg, Laurie, thank you so much for all that you do. We are just so behind it, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Can county commissioners open their own meetings with prayer? The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit recently prohibited Rowan County's commissioners from opening their meetings with prayer. But the federal courts of appeal are split over whether prayers offered by legislators at local government meetings are unconstitutional. In another one of our cases, Bournemouth versus County of Jackson, the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit approved of the very same practice. Opening government meetings with prayer is a centuries-old tradition that goes back to before the founding of our nation and continues to this day before Congress, state houses, and thousands of local governments across the country. It shouldn't be very controversial. The Supreme Court previously approved of the longstanding tradition of legislative prayer and its role in solemnizing policymaking sessions, encouraging lawmakers to selflessly seek the greater good, and acknowledging the role that faith plays in the lives of millions of Americans. In 1983, in Marsh versus Chambers, and then again in Town of Greece versus Galloway, the Supreme Court held that prayers offered by private citizens before government meetings are fully consistent with the Constitution and an important part of America's history and heritage. But what if that citizen is an elected official? That's the question we hope the Supreme Court will now answer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Noel Boucher with Pure Hope, and I've had the privilege of being on Point of View Radio multiple times over the years, and I just want to wish everyone at Point of View Radio, the whole team, a happy 45th anniversary.
This is a week where we're sort of celebrating our 45th anniversary. We're coming up on the end of the year that has been the 45th year of Point of View, and so it's kind of fun for me, and I do want to mention our website. We put up several articles that I've mentioned throughout the show, and one that I did not mention, Democratic tax nonsense. And this is interesting because, of course, no Democrats in the Senate voted for the tax bill that they agreed upon over the weekend. And yet there are many things that they should like in the bill. And a gentleman named Hank Adler wrote about this at townhall.com. And, you know, just the decrease in the corporate tax rate and the potential this has for bringing jobs and more prosperity to the country should be reason number one that many more people in the Senate and the House should support this, Democrat and Republican. In fact, he says the reduction in the corporate tax rate should be causing late-night parties in blue states and cities where pension plans have been underwater for years. It's pension plans that invest most heavily in the stock market, and this, even just the idea that we're going to get a tax cut has been wonderful for the stock market. So many other reasons are listed in this article, and I want to commend that to you. I also want to commend you to our website so that you can see more about the Steve McQueen, the movie about him, Steve McQueen, an American Icon, that Greg Laurie put together. You can go to pointofview.net and click through to that. And then I want to mention one more thing that's happening very big this week, and that is tomorrow. And our co-host, Kelly Shackelford, will be in Washington, D.C. tomorrow at the U.S. Supreme Court. He will be in the courtroom when attorneys argue the case defending the rights of Masterpiece Bakery baker Jack Phillips to decline to bake a cake for same-sex wedding, which is really an artistic creation. He calls his bakery Masterpiece Bakeries, and his creations are masterpieces. It's a free speech case, and there are varying opinions on this, but we've been talking about it for months, actually years. It's finally hit the Supreme Court. And so just to kind of talk through it a little bit, we spoke with Matt Staver. Matt Staver heads up another religious liberty organization. The group that is actually arguing the case for Jack Phillips is Alliance Defending Freedom. And Kelly's going because his organization, First Liberty Institute, has filed briefs in the case. Matt Staver, I'm sure his group, Liberty Council, has also filed a brief. He calls this case of Jack Phillips of Colorado's Masterpiece Cake Shop huge.
This is a huge case, and it will affect every person. It's not just going to affect bakers or florists or wedding photographers or those that deal with weddings. This has a huge implication. It really pits the First Amendment right to freedom of speech against the new founded so-called LGBT agenda.
A lot of times when we talk about these things, we talk about the idea that it's either your religious freedom or your sexual freedom, that the sexual revolution brought with us now this whole demand to overcome people's religious liberty with people's rights to conduct their sexual lives in, any way they want to. And so, that's kind of what this case comes down to. And Matt Staver, again, with Liberty Council, talking about this case and saying, what if we lost this?
It would allow the government to force private citizens to speak a message of the government's own choosing, even though it was offensive and violation of a conscience or religious freedom of the private individual.
And in this case, Jack Phillips had a bakery. He was asked by two homosexuals to bake a cake for their same-sex, basically wedding in Massachusetts, and then they were coming back to Colorado where they are to celebrate. He said no, and that turned into this huge case. It's all the way at the Supreme Court. Really, it's the Civil Rights Commission in his town in Colorado that's trying to force him to bake this cake and to have sensitivity training for his employees with regard to LGBT rights. And we've seen other bakers, we've seen wedding florists, we've seen photographers, and these battles continue. So hopefully at the Supreme Court, perhaps this could be settled, but we also don't know which way it's going to go. Anyway, here's Matt Staver on the far-reaching ramifications for religious liberty this case portrays.
It would be a horrendous assault on the First Amendment and our basic freedom. So that's why this is such an important case. This is not just about a cake. It's not just about a baker. It's not just about weddings. It's about our basic fundamental freedom.
We've seen a lot of other cases where just either the transgender agenda or the LGBT demands that they make on certain things on businesses have threatened to put businesses sort of out and to force them in certain ways to have certain policies that they disagree with. So there's a lot of freedoms at stake. It's not just the wedding industry. It's really all industries. And, you go back to the Hobby Lobby case. That was one at the Supreme Court. That had to do with contraception and the kind that causes an abortion. This is more on the LGBT end of it, but it's still a case about First Amendment's message, freedom of speech, freedom of what message do you want to send as an individual, as a business. These are the issues that are at stake here.
The First Amendment guarantees our right to be able to have freedom of speech, but it also guarantees the right for us not to speak. The government can't force you to present a message of your choice.
In this case, Jack Phillips just said he wouldn't sell the cakes. He doesn't sell cakes with alcohol in them. He doesn't sell cakes with Halloween themes. He doesn't sell cakes that celebrate divorce or anti-American weddings. George Will, and I think we may have posted this also, he's a conservative, but he has another opinion about cakes. He thinks it's okay. We should protect the First Amendment rights of photographers and perhaps florists, but he said a cake is a cake. It's food. It's not speech. And he says, why bully the baker? So really he thinks that bakers should have rights, but he does not think the Supreme Court should rule against the city and for the baker. So you can look at that at pointofview.net. But what are we expecting with regard to this decision? Well, Kelly looked at it last week, and he was pretty pessimistic. We'll hear more from him. I believe tomorrow he's going to call from the Supreme Court to find out how the oral arguments went. But here's Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel talking about the expectations. He thinks it'll be a 5-4 decision.
This case will certainly be a close case. It likely will be 5-4. But again, since it's the issue of the LGBT agenda, we just don't know which way the 5 versus the 4 will ultimately come down.
What he doesn't say is we don't know which way Anthony Kennedy is going to go. And as Kelly mentioned Friday in Point of View, Anthony Kennedy usually votes with the LGBT agenda on things, but sometimes he's reasonable on religious liberties. Here, those two are pitted against one another. So tomorrow you're going to, I think, even know from some of the arguments how these justices are thinking and where they're leaning. It's going to be very interesting, so pay attention. I do believe that Kelly, he's going to try his best to call in from the Supreme Court just to give his take on how these arguments went. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, I do want to mention pointofview.net. It's packed with our articles, things that we've discussed today, and our donate button is there. And as we celebrate Point of View this week, and we're really trying to celebrate it because we feel it's been such a great treasure to have this program for all these years, to give people the Christian take, the Christian worldview on the issues that face the nation. And we're so grateful to the Lord for providing that we would be able to have this ministry. So, in order to be one of his instruments and to donate, go to pointofview.net. There's a donate button. We also have our line, our caller line that you can also use a credit card. That's 800-347-5151. We would appreciate that. Have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.
To use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is